The Six Napoleons. Sherlock Holmes and I were often visited in the evenings by a detective from Scotland Yard named Mr. Lestrade. Mr. Holmes liked these visits because he was able to learn more about facts of Scotland Yard. This was London's most important police station. Holmes was known as an excellent detective, so Mr. Lestrade liked the visits too, often asking for advice. Holmes was always able to give useful advice once he listened carefully to the facts that Lestrade would give about the case. One evening, as Lestrade was visiting, he stopped their boring conversation they had been having about weather and nothing in particular. There was a silence for a few minutes. Finally, Holmes asked, "Do you have an interesting case for me this evening?" "Not really," Lestrade answered. "It is not very interesting. It isn't that important. I know you like the more complicated cases, and this one is simple. I think Mr. Watson would be more interested than you." I was surprised. Normally it is Holmes that manages all the cases. It is his specialty. I am just a doctor and not a detective. "What's the problem?" I said. "Is someone ill?" "Well, not physically ill," Lestrade said. "I think the person is completely mad." "I don't understand," I said. "Please explain." "Well, someone is stealing cheap busts of Napoleon and throwing them to the ground to break them. I think he must hate Napoleon. He went into a shop 4 days ago, and when the shop assistant's back was returned, he stole a bust and ran out the door with it. It is a shop on Kennington Road, and the owner's name is Morse Hudson. The madman threw the bust on the ground outside and ran away. No one was able to identify him." Holmes was curious, and I could see, and asked, "Why are you so interested in this?" "Well, it is not the only time this has happened," Lestrade said. "Yesterday it occurred again. This person broke into a house, this time a doctor's home named Barnicot. This doctor studies Napoleon and bought 2 of the busts of Morse Hudson's. He lives near the shop and put one in his home and the other in his office 2 miles away. When Dr. Barnicot woke up yesterday morning, he found the bust missing from his home and found it outside where it had been thrown against the garden wall, broken into pieces. About noon, he went to his office and found that bust also broken with pieces all over the room." "Were the 2 busts just alike?" Holmes asked. "This is getting more and more interesting." "Both were exactly the same," Lestrade said. "Why would this person choose these 3 busts?" Holmes thought out loud. "I am sure there are lots of these types of busts in London. What is special about them? I don't think he is interested in Napoleon. I think it is the busts." "I am not sure," said Lestrade. "It is a possibility, but how can we know exactly? This is the only shop in this part of London that sells these busts. Maybe the thief lives nearby and started with these busts. Dr. Watson, do you think that someone could hate Napoleon that much to do these mad things?" "I guess it is a possibility," I said. "I know of several cases in the history of medicine that are similar, but I am curious how the madman knew where these three busts were located. The next morning, as I was dressing, Holmes came to see me. Lestrade is in Kensington and asked for us to come there right away, he said. We had a quick cup of coffee and left immediately. The house was not far from London Centre. It was in a quiet area, but that morning there was a big group of people standing outside. We could see Lestrade standing in front of the house when we came nearer. He looked very serious, and we could see a lot of blood in front of the door outside. As we pushed through the crowd and approached the front door, Lestrade invited us inside. We met Horace Harker, the owner of the house. He was a journalist from the London newspaper, and he was excited about the story of the events that had just happened. He told us he was too frightened to write about it at that time. "Mr. Harker," Lestrade said, "would you be so kind to tell these gentlemen what happened as you know it?" "Certainly," he started. "About 3 o'clock this morning, I was asleep and was awakened by a loud cry. I was afraid but knew I had to investigate. I went downstairs and found the window to my study open, but no one in the room. I then noticed that the bust of Napoleon was missing. I opened the door to find a policeman and saw a dead man lying there with blood all over him." "And who is the dead man?" Holmes asked. "That's a good question," Lestrade said. "We don't know, but he had a street map of London in his pocket and a picture of this ugly man. There was also a knife laying beside him, but I'm not sure if that was the murderer's weapon or not." "And the bust of Napoleon?" Holmes asked. "It was found in a garden nearby of a house that is empty, broken like the others." We then went to look at the busts, leaving Mr. Harker at home. He wanted to write the article since he was feeling better. We found pieces of the bust by the garden wall at the empty house. Holmes examined some of the pieces carefully. "Do you see anything, Holmes?" Lestrade asked. "Not at the moment," Holmes said. "There are so many unanswered questions here. For example, why would someone want a sheep bust of Napoleon enough to kill a person? Also, why not just bring it at the house? Why bring it all the way here?" Lestrade thought about it for a minute and said, "Maybe he needed to be quiet and not let Mr. Harker hear him." "Yes, I agree this is possible, but why this house and not another?" Holmes answered. "This house was empty. No one could hear him," Lestrade said. There is another empty house closer on this road. Why not bring it there?" Holmes replied. "Look above us. There is a street light here. Maybe the other house was too dark to see." "How could that help us?" asked Lestrade. "I'm not sure at the moment," said Holmes. "I must think about it for a while." "What will you do now, Lestrade?" "I have to find out who the dead man is and why he was here last night. I think once I find that out, I will know who the killer is." "What do you think?" he answered. "That isn't my way, but maybe you are right," said Holmes. "Then, what are you going to do now?" asked Lestrade. "I will do things my way, and you do things your way, and we will meet later. Then we will talk," said Holmes. "One more thing. If you see Mr. Harker, please tell him that there was a dangerous Napoleon-hating madman in his house last night." "So, you really think that, Holmes?" Lestrade asked, surprised. "Not really," he said, laughing, "but it will make a great story for the readers. I would like to keep this photo of the dead man if possible. Please come to our rooms on Baker Street at 6 o'clock this evening. After you arrive, we will go somewhere together." We were told that Mr. Harker's bust came from a shop on High Street called Harding Brothers. We went to see Mr. Harding, but he was not there when we arrived. "We will come back later, Mr. Watson," Holmes said, disappointed. "Now we can go visit Mr. Morse Hudson's shop. That is where Dr. Barnicot bought his busts." When we arrived and questioned Mr. Hudson, he was not happy about the broken busts. He gave us some information about them. They were made at Gilder and Company on the other side of London. That is all I know. Holmes then took out the picture of the dead man and showed to him. "Do you know this man?" "Why, yes," Hudson answered. "That's Beppo. He is an Italian man who worked here in my shop for a short time. He was a good worker but left last week without telling me." We left the shop and Holmes was pleased with the information was received. We then went to where the busts were made at Gilder and Company. It took us a while to get there. We had to pass through different parts of London, rich and poor areas. We finally got to the area called Stepney. It was rich in the past, but things had changed. It was now a working area on the poor, and many of the people came from other countries. Finally, we found Gilder and Company. There was a German man there whom we talked to. "We made hundreds of busts in the past, but this year we made only 6. We sold 3 to Mr. Hudson and 3 to Mr. Harding. They weren't expensive busts. They were made by some Italian man." Holmes showed the picture to the man. "That's Beppo," he said, getting red in the face. "He is a terrible man. He worked here, but it has been over a year." "Why do you say he is a terrible man?" Holmes asked. "He tried to kill a man with a knife. The police found him here and cuffed him. The man didn't die, so they only sent Beppo to prison for 1 year. He has a friend that works here now. Do you want to speak with him?" "If you would please not say anything to him at this time," Holmes said. "It is very important to keep this quiet." "One final question," Holmes began. "In your book here, it says the busts were sold on June 3rd of last year. Can you remember what day the police came for people?" "Yes, I do remember. They came a few days after May 20th. I remember because that was the last day I paid people. This is very helpful information. Thank you very much for your time, and please remember not to say anything on this to People's friend," he said, and we left together. Since we hadn't eaten, we decided to stop at a restaurant. Holmes bought a newspaper to see if there was an article by Mr. Harker about the murder at this house. He was excited to find something, and after he read it, he laughed. "This story is mostly wrong, but it will be helpful," he said. I didn't understand, but said nothing. I laughed myself because it was a very silly story. When we finished eating, we decided to go back to Harding Brothers. Luckily, Mr.